Je le mets à zéro. Au moins, il y a du son.
J'essaye.
Ouais.
Moi, je l'avais le micro pour essayer. C'est juste sur cette Ça va, Niki? Ça fonctionne? Ça va?
T'as essayé?
Ça se passe bien?
Allô?
C'est correct, ça se passe bien?
Tu m'entends?
Ça doit faire 100%.
Ouais, ouais, je pense que oui. Ouais.
Salut Olivier.
Là, il y a une seconde.
Yes. Tu parles en anglais, mais toi, tu parles?
Allô, allô, allô. Bonjour. Bonjour Olivier. Est-ce que le son est bien? Tu sais pas?
Ben, il y a au moins une minute peut-être. Là.
Ok. Est-ce que tu veux que je te chante une chanson?
Vas-y.
Oui. Alors, là, mais pour l'instant, on fera avec un et
Ah, ben, tu t'es vraiment bon. Là.
là, là, je m'appelle Toto, je suis un escargot qui fait du vélo. Est-ce que j'y suis là ou pas encore?
Le son est bien?
Tu commences à parler. Là.
Ok, bonjour, bienvenue à
C'est
Québec,
super bon. C'est super bon.
voir le Olivier Show ce soir. Ça va être fou. De la grande improvisation tout au long de la soirée. Du jeu, du jeu, du jeu. Allô, allô, allô. C'est bien?
Super bien.
Ah ouais?
Le petit micro là?
Mais t'as pas chanté encore. Là, tu chantes.
Tu veux que je chante?
Là, non.
Non,
dans,
c'est qu'il y
dans
a
le
eu
son.
un délai, fait que là, t'es en train de chanter.
Mais le son est bon.
Bon, c'est génial.
Faut pas parler.
Ben, ça va aller, je pense.
Oui.
Pour,
Je me parle, c'est ça. Je suis dans la son, mais tout est bon. Bon, donc tu veux, ça serait le temps.
very happy and excited to have all of you with us during next 3 days in this first international seminar, Learning Music Through Play in Out-of-School Context. And we are very, very thankful you choose to pass the next 3 days with us to see how we can better valorize and integrate a playful approach in music education. Donc, on est très heureux de vous avoir avec nous pour ce premier séminaire international Learning Music Through Play in Out-of-School Context. Et on est aussi très reconnaissant que vous avez choisi de passer ces 3 jours-là avec nous pour voir comment est-ce qu'on peut mieux intégrer et valoriser une telle approche dans l'apprentissage et l'enseignement de la musique. The dog is so lovely. So, you are coming from different countries, Brazil, England, Mexico, Australia, United States, Denmark, France, Canada, and of course, Quebec. We are not a country, but we are pretending that we are because we are so special and different. And we also have people around the world on the channel YouTube that we created. So we have the presentation broadcast and live stream. We also are a group of people with diverse expertise. We have undergraduate and graduate students in music, music teachers, directors of music schools, game designers, researchers, and we will do our best to highlight this various experience during the next 3 days and to promote exchanges between all of you. And the voice of each of you are very important for us. Unfortunately, we'll miss the voice of the young musicians with us during the next 3 days, but I'm promising you that the next time we'll have the seminar, we will have them with us. Donc, on est un groupe de personnes qui avons des expertises très diversifiées et différentes. Donc, on a des étudiants de premier, deuxième et troisième cycle qui étudient en musique. On a des professeurs de musique, on a des directeurs d'école de musique, on a des game designers, on a des chercheurs avec nous. Donc, on va faire notre maximum, notre possible pour mettre en lumière ces diverses expertises durant les 3 prochains jours et pour promouvoir des échanges parmi vous tous. passe comme prévu, cette école de musique va ouvrir en septembre 2020 et notre approche éducative sera basée essentiellement sur le jeu ou sur des approches plus ludiques. Et je suis très heureux de vous dire aujourd'hui qu'on va engager nos premiers game designers cet été pour faire le développement du matériel pédagogique dont on aura besoin en fait, pour remplir notre mission. Et évidemment, tout ce matériel pédagogique-là sera partagé avec tous, avec ceux en fait, qui veulent l'utiliser pour leurs besoins d'enseignement. The Université des Jeunes Musiciens will also have a strong social dimension. Indeed, we want to work with young people from a mix of social backgrounds. And we'll welcome young refugees and immigrants in Quebec City, young people from social background at risk, young people with a parent who's studying at Laval University, and we'll mix them with young people coming from more regular background family. And this will enchase the social value of the project, promote also the live together in Quebec City and for our youth and families, and will expand the range of impacts of our educational approach that can be scientifically studied. Donc, l'Université des Jeunes Musiciens aura aussi un background, une dimension sociale très forte. I wrote my notes in English, but not in French, so donc il y a une dimension sociale très forte. En fait, on veut que mixer en fait des jeunes qui viennent de différents milieux sociaux. On va avoir des jeunes réfugiés et immigrants avec nous de la ville de Québec. On peut avoir également des jeunes qui viennent de familles peut-être un petit peu plus à risque, background un peu plus à risque, des jeunes qui ont un parent qui étudie à temps plein à l'Université Laval, et on va les mixer avec d'autres jeunes qui viennent d'un milieu familial un peu plus standard. Et ce mix-là, en fait, de jeunes venant de différents milieux va mettre davantage en valeur l'aspect social de ce projet-là, vise également à promouvoir le vivre ensemble à Québec, autant pour les jeunes que pour leur famille, et vise aussi à étendre les différents impacts que notre approche éducationnelle peut être étudiée scientifiquement. So the educational activities of the Université des Jeunes Musiciens will be integrated into the pedagogical training of our master's and PhD students in music pedagogy, and will also be scientifically tested by an international team of researchers. So the most of these researchers are here today in the next 3 days, and they will doing communications and workshop during the next 3 days. Our research projects will help us to better understand the impact of a playful approach on music learning, the well-being of young people, their engagement toward the musical learning, and the development of various competencies considered essential in this 21st century. Donc, les activités éducatives de l'Université des Jeunes Musiciens seront intégrées à la formation pédagogique de nos étudiants de maîtrise et de doctorat en pédagogie musicale, et seront aussi testés scientifiquement par une équipe internationale de chercheurs. Et ces chercheurs-là sont presque tous ici. Durant les 3 prochains jours, ils vont faire des communications et des workshops. Donc, je les remercie d'être ici durant les 3 prochains jours. Et notre approche, donc les projets en fait qu'on va développer, qu'on va réaliser ensemble, vont nous permettre d'avoir une meilleure compréhension des impacts d'une approche basée sur le jeu, sur l'apprentissage musical, sur le bien-être aussi des jeunes, leur engagement envers leur apprentissage musical, et sur le développement de diverses compétences qu'on considère essentielles en ce 21e siècle. We have planned 3 days where you can better understand the impact of a playful approach on learning and life of young people, and workshop we hope it will inspire you for your music teaching. And we also plan sessions to play musical games, and because we want you also to have fun during this seminar. And one of the very important activities for our team will be the round tables of today and tomorrow. So these round tables aim to gather as many ideas as possible to set up our international network in the field of learning music through play. So the voice of each of you is extremely important to us so that everyone can benefit from this network. We have created roundtables in French and roundtables in English, so that way everyone will be able to express themselves more easily and freely in a language you master. So please stay with us until the end of the day to participate to these roundtables. Donc, une des activités très importantes pour nous, pour notre équipe en fait, et ce sont les tables rondes qui auront lieu aujourd'hui et demain. Et ces tables rondes-là visent à faire émerger autant d'idées possibles qu'on peut avoir à propos de notre network international dans le domaine de Learning Music Through Play. Donc, la voix de chacun de vous est extrêmement importante pour nous tous, afin que ce network-là corresponde à vos intérêts, ce que vous recherchez. Et on a créé des tables rondes en français et en anglais, donc vous pourrez tous vous exprimer facilement et librement dans une langue que vous maîtrisez bien. Donc, s'il vous plaît, restez avec nous jusqu'à la fin de la journée. Ne partez pas tout de suite après les workshops, parce que ces tables rondes sont très importantes pour vous. Today the focus will be more on the learner, and tomorrow the day will be focused on various aspects of games or playful approach. And Monday the discussion will be more focused on network winning features. All morning will be in this room and the concert hall, and the lunch will be at the Café Labyrinthe at the first floor, so don't worry, we can bring you there, but we have a very good signalization. The play sessions will be in 3 rooms just outside in front here of the concert hall, and we'll have one just a little bit behind for the play sessions. The workshop will be in my lab, and one room just beside my lab at the 4th floor. And even that we can bring you there, and we have very good signalizations to go there. And we will come back here in this room for the roundtables before to divide the group into 6 different groups with anglophone groups and francophone groups. You will be given this morning in your pocket a document explaining various information that will be very useful for you, such as how to connect to Wi-Fi, so it's very important to have Wi-Fi now, and how to access the complete program of the seminar. So we have a website where you have all biography and abstract of communication workshops and different activities. So, to get in the mood of the seminar, I want to take a few minutes to ask you a question you will answer live to create a word cloud. So people who follow us on YouTube can also participate to this activity. So to do this, you must go on www.menti.com and enter code 732262. And I will ask you to answer to the questions. You can use that with your computer, with your cell phone. It's not a problem. You don't need an application. It's just a website. And I will ask you, what are you most looking forward during these 3 days? Donc, pour se mettre un peu dans l'ambiance du séminaire, je vais prendre quelques minutes pour vous poser une question à laquelle vous pouvez répondre en direct pour créer un nuage de mots, ce qu'on appelle un word cloud. Et les gens qui sont à distance peuvent aussi participer à cette activité. Donc, vous devez tout simplement vous rendre sur www.menti.com et entrer le code qui est là et répondre à la question qu'en avez-vous le plus pendant ces 3 jours. Donc, vous avez la possibilité de rentrer de 1 à 4 mots seulement pour créer le word cloud. Oui.
Je pense que c'est la première question, c'est what was your main takeaway yesterday? C'est la première question. Est-ce qu'on peut sauter des questions?
Oui, en fait, je vais vous montrer.
We just put the information into this question.
It's this one. Ah, je n'ai pas donné le nom peut-être, c'est ça?
Je pense que
ah, ok, non, ok, désolé. C'est le 39-03-90. Donc, je n'ai pas écrit le bon code. Donc, so, for people, you have to go and enter. I have to put my glasses. 39-03-90.
word cloud.
Wait.
I'm lost. So I'm the same where he is.
30.
There.
Yeah, it's, so you have to
Go back.
Go back.
go back.
Okay.
And then a new code.
Okay.
39.
39.
Yeah.
So you have to go. It should appear. It's here. 7 people? I don't know. Yeah. So, learning, playing. You see? Ideas, networking games, learning. Networking collaboration. So you are 13 to enter, so if there is more change. Learning, it changed a little bit. Learning is the most important one. We have 21 people, networking, collaboration, ideas, direction, taking design. Play, ideas. Okay, so I can move out there. So I think we can start now our seminar. So I invite Jennifer Zosh. She's not in music education, but she's a professor at the Penn State University in Pennsylvania. That's it. And she's working in the field, different field, but about the field of learning through play. She's also researchers for the Lego Foundation. And she will present playful learning, a powerful pedagogical approach supporting holistic development. So I asked her to come to talk with you because it's important to understand what means exactly learning through play, integrating different approaches of free play, guide play, games, and different things. So I asked her to come to present it and to understand the range of impacts it can have on kids, young people. So thank you very much, and welcome to Jennifer Zosh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, this one. Oh, no, exactly. Everyone, this is good. Can you hear me? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so thrilled to be here. And as you heard, I'm not a music educator, so I'm prefacing all of that. But I think the work that I've been doing for the last couple of years can really inform our understanding of playful learning in every domain of development. Right? So my training and my background is in early cognitive development. So I've learned a lot about how children learn. The way I got into this is, as a child, I used to babysit, and then I think anyone in here who's an educator probably knows what I'm talking about. When I say like that spark, when a kid gets it, like that little glimmer in the eye, when that thing that they've been working to get through, it finally comes online. I love that. And as I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, I came into a lab of an early cognitive development research lab. And what they studied was how children learn, and I got hooked. And that's exactly what I've been doing for the last couple of years, is thinking a lot about how children learn and what we can do as adults to help them to learn. Much of my work is framed for the last 10 years or so is thinking about two simultaneous challenges, which is that as anybody who has children, sees children, goes out in public knows, what we're seeing, what kids are seeing on a day-to-day life is a little bit different than what we ourselves have. Right? So a lot of us, I think, can think about these scenes that I have up here and say, yeah, I can think about that, I can remember that. Or even how we may have been exposed to music as a young child or as a toddler. But we know that times are changing, right? So now when you go out, you typically see lots of tablets and smartphones. Daily lives have changed for kids. And I think one of the things that I think a lot about, and I think most of my colleagues think a lot about, is what does this mean for learning? What does this mean for kids? And is there a way to harness that in really powerful ways? And in fact, I was thinking about this in relation to music, and I thought, okay, well, let me think about my own experience with music and what that looked like in kind of a natural, everyday setting when I was an infant and toddler, compared to what my niece or my nephew is experiencing. And I thought about, I went to YouTube because everything is on YouTube. So when I think about Old MacDonald, I think about, oh, my mom, we're singing, we're sitting in the living room. I don't think about this Old MacDonald who had a farm that 77 million children think about, or one kid 77 million times, which is also a possibility, right? Or the 48 million who are looking at Janny learning to play the piano, or the 2.6 billion people who have now thought about Baby Shark. Sharks never will be the same now, thanks to Baby Shark. Right, and in fact, I went to YouTube and I typed in children learning instruments, and I think it came back with 119 million hits. So it's a different world for kids. And I think it's really easy to fall into the camps of, oh, well, this is really bad, or it's great. But I think that where the magic happens is in the middle. And that's what I've been concentrating on in the last few years, is thinking about what's that magic in the middle. What are the things that we can do to help prepare kids? Because let's face it, our world today is different, right? Our world today is digital, it's connected in ways it's never been before. You, I'm guessing like myself, maybe have smartphones, smart devices, smart speakers. I can now wake up in the morning and ask Alexa to tell me what time it is, so I don't have to put on my glasses to see what time it is, right? She turns on my lights. I've given over all of my privacy, it's what has happened, right? But we're in a different world now, so what does this mean for kids? And I think we also have to think, kind of the second half of the challenges that I've been facing is thinking about what are the skills that kids need going forward? What are the 21st century skills? Because information isn't the currency anymore, it's being able to use those skills in really powerful ways. At the same time, we also have to think about what this means, and I think this is why I ended up doing a lot of work with toddlers and infants in early childhood, is because we actually know that about 20% of kids' time is spent in formal schooling. That's the other 80% is kind of a lot, it's a huge proportion of kids' lives. What are we doing with that other 80%? Is it spent watching 17 hours of Baby Shark? And if so, is that good or is that bad? For every parent in the room, they probably say, okay, that's bad, right? Sharks have now been ruined. But I think that the answer, luckily, comes down to something really powerful, which is that kids are well equipped and ready to use something that comes very naturally to them, which is play. I think kids are up to the task of dealing with this changing world in really innovative ways because of how they're kind of naturally built to learn. Because kids, and other animals, have an innate drive to play. Right? We see this with octopuses, we see this with non-human primates, we see it with our babies, we see it with our colleagues. There's this natural drive to play, and I think that's actually going to be the thing that saves us all. That's just no tall order, right? But it's going to be the thing I think that really helps us and helps kids to deal with this changing world, is that they have this natural drive to play regardless of what that play necessarily looks like. So I want to take a second now and ask you to think about what play is. So I don't have the fancy online type thing. I'm going to go old school here. So I want you to close your eyes for 20 seconds. So everyone, don't fall asleep. Close your eyes, 20 seconds. Think in your head about one of your favorite play memories as a kid. Close your eyes. We have it? Turn to someone near you, or a couple people near you, say hello, and share your memory. I want to see how much overlap we get with that. So just make a friend. Make 2 friends. Okay. So if I can have us come back. This is one of my favorite things to do because you've never seen an audience light up as much as when you ask them to do this. Not only when I had the 20 seconds of you thinking about it, did I see closed eyes and smiles as you would as something came across your mind, but hearing you and seeing you talk about it, you start to see kind of a light, right? A lightness and enjoyment and joy that I think is really powerful. So how many of you thought about an activity where you were alone in your memory? Okay, a handful. How many were with 1 or 2 other kids? Okay. Anyone with adults? Okay, a couple. There were a couple with adults. No, that's okay. Play looks very different, right? Did anyone have the same memory as someone near them? Well, you had a little bit? Okay. But you don't see, it's not like there's one thing that is play and nothing else is play. And I think that's one of the challenges, right? Because how do you classify and think about play that looks very, very different? You have someone playing with an adult in their life. You have anyone play with pets? Does anyone have a pet memory? Right, what does that mean then if we say that play is important and kids play and play can help learning, but how do you actually think about and define play in a way that actually makes it something we can measure and really infuse? Because it's great to say, add some magic in, but what does that really mean? And I think that's what I've been concentrating on the last few years, is thinking about what is that magic and how can we think about play in the service of learning. So my colleagues and I'll talk about this, my colleagues and I started to think about play as a spectrum, and I think one of the ways that we might be able to kind of come together today with the work that I've done and the work that all of you are doing is thinking about where on the spectrum the playful experiences are for kids. So, and I think play isn't the only thing that exists along a spectrum, right? Our love for our fur babies is probably different than that of our human babies, maybe, right? Our love of pumpkin spice lattes is hopefully different than that of our partners. If not, there might be a problem, right? There's a whole spectrum. Everything is really complicated, right? So I think that breaking things down so we can think about what play means and what that looks like will be a really powerful tool. And the same thing goes for colors, things like autism spectrum disorder, right? There's lots of things in our lives that are more complicated than it's there or it's not there. And that's what I think my colleagues and I have argued over the last couple of years in the work that I've done with colleagues, an international group of colleagues at the LEGO Foundation, is to think about what does this play spectrum look like, and also how do we facilitate that play as adults in the service of learning. So these are two white papers. They're both freely available, so if it might be useful in your lives, you can search. Luckily, my last name is really weird, so it's pretty easy. If you just Google ZOSH and white paper, it'll come up. But these are two white papers that really talk about kind of the state of the art and the state of science when it comes to play generally, and then also how to facilitate that play. And what we wanted to do in here was capture the differences that exist in these different scenes of play. In the scenes of play where you were with adults, when you were with kids, when you were with pets, when you were by yourself, when you were with peers, what does that really look like? And where we came up with was this playful spectrum that ranges on one side from free play. How many of you were engaged in free play in your play memories? Like you had no adults directing it, it was just kind of like kids doing their own thing. Some yes, not everybody. Right, and I think this is that's the kind of play that we'll talk more about it, but that's kind of the play, like go outside and play until the street lights come on. That was kind of a common thing in my childhood. You just did whatever you kind of wanted, within reason, right? But you figured it out for yourself. We then also see what we've been calling for the last 10 or 15 years guided play, which is this idea that you have playful experiences, but there's a little bit of guidance. And I think this is where a lot of the magic happens when we talk about kids learning specific content or specific skills. We kind of don't take away the magic of the play, but instead kind of help kids get to where we want them to go in a really meaningful way. Games, I think, fall right alongside guided play in terms of games usually provide some structure, some content, depending on the game itself. There's natural kind of things built into games to get kids where you want them to be. And then on the flip side, which we don't really call playful learning because it's not playful, is direct instruction, right? This is kind of that drill and kill. I think back to my own elementary school experience, it was definitely on this where you sat there and you took the things and you did the worksheets and that was it. So as my group of colleagues and I came together, we again created this idea that the adult's role in play can vary, because there's been a big debate in the field. Like adults are in the play, it's not play anymore. Adults are not in the play, that's the only way that you can think about play. And I think when we talk about play and what this looks like in the lives of kids, it's not that simple. Because adults, teachers, peers, mentors, all of those people play important roles. And I think kind of pulling that apart and seeing the differences is really crucial. So now when we explore things like free play and what that means for learning, we see that both the child both initiates and directs the play. We don't do, as the adult, we don't do kind of a whole heck of a lot there. We don't kind of infuse it with numbers because we're trying to get them to learn numbers, right? Instead, we might support that play. So when one kid bites the other kid, we step in, right? Sure. But it's not that we're directing or explaining it. We see that free play has been linked to executive function skills, so we know that kids who do more socio-dramatic play in the fall actually show better executive function self-regulation skills in the spring, right? So thinking about play, you have to take on a role and stay in that role. I always joke, a friend of mine in graduate school talked about how she would play with her brother, and she always made him be the dog. Poor kid. Right? But this poor kid had to play the role of the dog all the time. He has really good self-regulation skills, and he's okay now and they're friends. But right, there's lots of skills that come from that. It helps them regulate their emotions, play things out. I mean, I think we've all been in that experience where you are playing with your children or with kids in your lives, and you realize kind of what's going on in their heads, or what they're nervous about. So you go to the doctor, and then all of a sudden you're playing doctor for the next 6 months. Right? There's lots of meaningful work that comes from free play. But I think that when we think about actual content in terms of numeracy, literacy, I mean, even thinking about things like music games, it's not just like, here, go, and we're going to give you absolutely no guidance. So for guided play, what we see here is that the adult may initiate, but the child directs it. So the adult doesn't take over, but the adult supports kids in that playful experience. So they might set the goals attuned to what they want kids to learn, but the child can choose what to do, how to do it. The adult does not take over. When we think about the adult taking over, we think about that as being co-opted play. Kids, in here, we've seen evidence over and over again that this kind of guided play can lead to higher gains on things like literacy, numeracy, social skills, and self-regulation, even when compared to free play. So it seems to be a really important way of kind of harnessing the positives of play, but also harnessing that for learning. And games, again, I think are really similar. I would argue that they're kind of right neck and neck in terms of guided play. So for games, right, we have kind of the serious games that people will sometimes talk about that have learning goals in mind versus freeze tag, which is a little bit less about learning goals, but it's still really important to help build self-regulation. But we see here that adults, again, the adults or the games themselves provide some of that structure for kids to be able to find the learning in it. But what makes it so powerful? One of the things that that my field has been doing is trying to compare what's kids learning in free play versus guided play versus direct instruction. And most of the research is showing that guided play is where the magic is. That's where the best learning happens. So the question is, what makes it so powerful? And I think one proposal has been brought forth, not by me, but by people I've collaborated with, that suggests that guided play almost sets up kind of a cognitive mise-en-place for kids. Right, so it's a psychological, rather than culinary, mise-en-place refers to how one stands towards a given environment, places constraints on what one feels able to do within that environment, and how these assessments and predispositions impact the process of preparing to act. These contextual and dispositional factors unite to make a particular goal or set of goals easier to reach by emphasizing some choices and downplaying or eliminating others. And the best way, I just really like this as a way to think about kids and playful learning, which is if you have an early chef and you say, go into Whole Foods and make a fantastic meal. A, it's super overwhelming. There's so many choices. We all have paralysis if we go into like a place like a Whole Foods or a fancy supermarket, like, okay, I don't even know where to start. Versus, you have a well-stocked refrigerator. It's kind of like those boxes now that everyone buys that they get sent to your house, and they kind of give you all the materials you need, and then all of a sudden you can make a meal that actually tastes good. That's kind of the way I see guided play, is it constrains that possibility of space for kids, so they're able to create in really powerful ways. And again, it's trying to say how we can capture that magic that can happen in those everyday playful moments. So when you're playing with one of those things where you put the circle on top of the stacking thing, that's the word, versus what I had said what my education was like, which was about direct instruction. Teacher-led or adult-led, child just kind of follows along if you're kind of lucky. So when we think back about this play spectrum, I think where the magic happens is in that umbrella of playful learning. And I think where it really shines is when we think about what we mean by learning. So we also created this idea of kind of what different degrees of learning look like. So you have kind of surface learning versus the deep learning. And I think all of us agree that where the magic is in the deep learning, right? The surface learning, so learning that exact, triangle has 3 sides, a hexagon has 6, that's fine. It's kind of that natural, it's like when any of you have that experience with kids where they make you think they know numbers, so they'll count, and then you'll say, okay, so how many are there? And they'll say something completely random. It's kind of like they have the count list, they have like the surface idea of what numbers are, but they don't have the deep understanding. Where we think the magic is happening with play and guided play is transitioning kids to deep learning. And deep learning is going to be the stuff that's going to be what lets them excel today and excel tomorrow. So we think here about how you can connect the facts that are coming in with that deeper, rich conceptual knowledge that we think is really important for kids. And we think that guided play is the thing that kind of transitions kids from that surface learning to real deep learning. So that's great and all. Okay, so we can think about play like a spectrum, magic happens in the playful learning, but what is it about that experience? What can any of you take if you're designing a game, or if any of us are designing a lesson for kids? What is it that you can do to help support that learning? So there's been a lot of work in the cognitive development world thinking about the science of learning. So this is kind of a newer multidisciplinary approach that looks at computer science, machine learning, psychology, education, sociology, all of those kinds of topics to look at what's the magic about how learning happens. So there's a lot of papers that have come out, there's journals that are focused on it, trying to look at what's the magic of what makes learning happen. So that's what I want to talk about for the last little bit, is thinking about what are the characteristics that actually lead to learning. And what you'll see is those characteristics align directly with that of play. So let me tell you about those characteristics. This is work that I did with my colleagues at the LEGO Foundation. So I'm going to they have beautiful graphics there, so I'm going to play a short video that talks about these characteristics, and then we'll see how those map onto play itself.
So, the world no longer rewards people for what they know. Instead, the reward is for what we can do with what we know. This is the new reality our children face. Life-changing technologies, jobs that haven't even been invented, and all sorts of challenges that we can't foresee. This means that what children learn and how they learn it must also change to look a lot more like the way we naturally learn, through play. But what does that look like in practice? Here are 5 characteristics of learning through play. Number 1, actively engaging. So coming up with ideas, or just learning something new, is much more likely when you're actively engaged. Does that mean to dance or to jump around? Well, it could, but it doesn't have to. It's more about becoming so involved, so invested in what you're doing, that learning happens naturally. Like when children solve a real-world problem that matters to them. As they brainstorm and conduct research interviews, they're immersing themselves in the subject. Or when they demonstrate the same level of involvement with creative technologies, taking a hands-on approach, building models, and getting immediate feedback when the models are tested, these children are focused, eager to explore and challenge themselves. Number 2, socially interactive. We can of course play and learn on our own, but when we share our ideas, something happens. We get the chance to see something from another perspective, to explain things, negotiate, and then reach a compromise. We learn to communicate and engage with others. Like these children. Their handyman needs more space for his tools, and the kids have decided to help. They're tackling a problem that's relevant to them and people they care about. To actually design and build a solution together requires successful social interaction. This is a way for children to practice the most important skill for future jobs, well, and life in general, being able to operate in a team. Number 3, iterative. Learning isn't always about being told how to do something correctly. Sometimes it takes a few mistakes to know how to progress. Keep trying and you'll get there in the end. This is textbook iterative learning. And here too, it's all about testing, changing something around, and then testing it again. Iteration strengthens critical thinking and reasoning. So it all leads to a deeper sense of what works and why. Number 4, joyful. Learning can often take a long time, and success can seem far away. Let's be honest, it's tough if you're not enjoying it. But it is a thrill to get somewhere. And as we get more involved, we chase that. Nothing spurs you on quite like the feeling you get as you're progressing. It's also about enjoying a task for its own sake. Joy is a huge motivation to continue learning. Number 5, meaningful. When a task makes sense to us and builds on what we know, when we truly care, learning becomes meaningful. These children are going to remember how they went about solving the handyman's problem because it meant something to them. Learning by solving real-life problems not only benefits them as individuals, but also their families, their school, their community, and the world. When you really grasp ideas, understand how they connect, and eventually apply them in new ways, this is learning at its deepest. The world of today and tomorrow is one of challenges, but also tremendous opportunity. Gaining knowledge is one important step. Really, children need a deep understanding that allows them to apply their knowledge to different situations and then spark new ideas. This takes practice. Let's give children a chance. Let's build on how children learn through play.
So I think that this video does a really good job of capturing what the research says, not just what Jen Sash thinks or what some random person at the LEGO Foundation thinks, right? But what science has actually told us about how children learn. And I think what's crucial here is it's not about learning one thing. Those characteristics doesn't just describe how kids learn to read. I think it describes how kids learn anything, whether that's literacy, numeracy, how to kind of hold themselves together when they want to fall apart. Right, I talk about this with my college students about what made it that you came to my 9 a.m. class when you didn't really want to, right? That self-regulation that we think is so important. Learning through play, I think, provides kids with the mechanism to learn anything. And I think that's what's really crucial as we think about how to build experiences for kids. Joy, I think, is something that's really powerful that we haven't paid enough attention to. And now, as I was sitting here, you know, you have those moments, or as I was standing here, you have those moments of self-realization. I'm realizing now that probably one of the reasons I studied play and think about how these experiences that kids have growing up is so important is because we nicknamed my grade school the school of no fun. That's what my parents used to call it, because it was like everything we did, there was no fun in it. It was the only school I could go to, so that's why I went to the school of no fun. Right, but I knew that that wasn't the best way for kids to learn. And in fact, the research suggests that joy is really important. And in fact, if we don't have the joy, it's probably not play anymore, right? It's not that kind of moment of insight. And I think it's also important to think about joy not as like, it's rainbows and butterflies all of the time, but that there's that moment of surprise or insight. And I think that you can really see that kind of wraps kids in. I heard someone, when you were describing your play memories, talk about how you could do that thing for hours. It was you. You said it. Right. But you could do whatever that thing was for hours, and you kind of lose track of time. When you are in that zone, it's really easy to stay engaged. And I think joy is something that I think music especially has a way to spark that. And again, research says that. We have an entire field of psychology called positive psychology that talks about the impact of joy and positive feelings on health, on life, on love, and in terms of even how children learn and how we can resolve trauma in our lives. We know that if babies are surprised, they're actually better able to learn the material that comes next. So it's not even just, oh yeah, it's a better way to learn because you're happy. But in fact, we think it actually amps up the system so you're better able to think and to receive information. And internal motivation is linked to positive affect. So internal motivation is directly linked to learning. So all of these things go together to help promote really powerful experiences for kids to learn. And more recent work in the neuroscience world tells us it's starting to uncover the mechanisms, the brain mechanisms that go with why joy makes us worth learning. You heard also about minds-on thinking, which is kind of that deep thinking, hypothesis testing, symbolic thinking, mental representation. It's that stuff where you're really actively, we call it minds-on, that you were thinking about, even if you're not physically active, your brain is active, when you're having those moments of insight, when you're not distracted. And this is one thing I will say, so I did a whole other section of my work about educational apps for kids and what's actually educational. Newsflash, most of them are not. They're pretty bad. If anyone has spent some time, at least with the general, and this is with toddlers, with some like the general learning ABCs, learning to count apps, most of them do not harness these characteristics in many meaningful ways. But a part of active engagement is staying on task and not distracted. And this is one thing that I think is really, what I see educational apps especially struggling with the most is how to not give us too much, how to not be distracting. And the way I think about it is, do you remember going in grade school and there'd be a fire alarm would go off, and you go outside, and you have to do it really quick, and teachers are yelling. Again, see, school's no fun. But you have that experience. You came back into class, were you learning anything? No, you were totally talking about the fire drill, and who did what, and this person tripped, and blah, blah, blah. It disrupts it, and I think that's one of the things that we see that technology has created a lot of this interruption. When I look at apps, there's a lot of interruption. So kids are counting, and all of a sudden, a fish comes up, and then you do a dance. You kind of lost that throw, and I think that's one of the things that we have to be really mindful of, and where I see technology struggling with the most is to prevent that distraction. And again, we see that this active minds-on thinking is really important, whether it's when kids are questioning and labeling during storybook reading, we see greater comprehension. We know that note takers learn more than non-note takers in our college classrooms. My students hate that I don't just give them the notes, but I just make them read that instead, and they hate me even more. But you get the sense here, right, where you have this active thinking that kids need to think about. We know that children learn better in developmentally appropriate, less passive environments, generating information rather than just reading it. And kids who ask questions and make observations in museums learn more than kids who don't. They're actively minds-on, engaged in that topic. And the thing with play is it gets kids to do that. It gets people to lose track of time. You don't have to force them to do it. You don't have to say, think about it, sit here and think about it. It just naturally harnesses that ability to have kids have minds-on thinking. Meaningfulness, I think, is really important, right? So the magic with kids is that they can learn anything, right? You could teach a kid a made-up language that no one uses, right? You could really mess with your kids. I don't suggest that you do that, but you could, right? They're learning machines. But when we see the magic for meaning happening is when kids are connecting that information with what they already know, right? It's how they build into these knowledge that spark of insight comes when they make that connection between what they're doing now and what they've done in the past, right? We see that going beyond that kind of like just memorizing, just doing the same things over and over and over again, just doing the worksheets. It can get you somewhere. It can get you a lot of that surface learning, but it can't get you as far into that idea of deeper learning. And it's actually interesting because we see that this is really important for kids even as young as infants and toddlers. So we know that kids will stay on task more if you give them like causally rich information. So if you explain to kids, they did this really cool study where they actually rewarded kids for doing a task, and they either gave them kind of more information about the task that they were doing or a sticker. Everyone, I think, would have thought, like, the sticker is what's going to work. Nope. It was that rich information. So kids kind of have that internal motivation to make sense of the world, and play can naturally exploit it. That sounds really negative, right? But it naturally exploits this thing that they already are doing magically. And naturally. Magically and naturally. You don't hear those go together, but you get my sense here, right? And we even see that making analogies between situations can lead to new insights and problem solving, learning moral lessons. This meaningfulness is critically important. You also heard about iterative thinking, and I think you see this when you hear about kids being natural-born scientists in the crib. Any of you who have had that experience with a child putting something over the high chair or the table and it drops over and over and over, but is it still going to drop? Is it going to drop Tuesday? Yep. Is it going to drop Wednesday? Yep. It's this kind of thinking and hypothesis testing all of the time. And you can see it. You ever do the thing where they are about to drop it, but they're looking at you? They're like, what's going to happen this time? Let's see. Can I really make their head explode? And that's kind of what they're doing. They're hypothesis testing. They're iterating on what they know and kind of changing things up to see what works. And one of the things that I think is really cool is there's been some work that has come out with preschoolers, and they called, it's work by Liz Lonowitz and colleagues, and they call it the double-edged sword of pedagogy. And it was talking about giving kids, it goes back to that idea of mindset. So if you tell kids, they put this machine up that kids won't have any experience with, and they basically said they had two different conditions, one in which an adult said, here's how the machine works. And it showed them, I think, 3 out of the 6 things the machine could do. So here's the adult saying, here's what it can do. They give it to the kid does those 3 things, that's about it. If the adult said, oh, I wonder what this thing can do, and it just kind of happened to come across those 3, when the kid was given the toy, the kid discovered the other functions, because when they took it out of this, like, someone telling me this is what I need to know and this is what I need to do, it made them explore, it made them create, it made them iterate, it made them play in really powerful ways. And we see this even with toddlers. So I think it's a challenge, and I think one of the things that people again, we have this dichotomy between play and learning. I once was doing some work and I overheard a parent say that they send their kids to school to learn, not to play. And I think that's the exact kind of wrong approach. And I think this is not, at a conference like this, I don't think I'm telling anyone something that they probably don't already know and already do in their daily lives. But I think that what's important here is thinking about what are the ways that we can harness that play and also make a compelling argument that is leading to increased learning. Because I think that's what a lot of parents and educators and school districts want to know is, well, that's great for kids to play, but what is it that they're actually learning? And the research out there suggests that guided play particularly is really crucial for kids. And of the last 5 characteristics, they talk about social interaction. And I think this is one that's also really critically important, especially when we think about those images I showed of little kids staring at tablets and alone in the rooms for hours playing. You can play without other people. Some of us have memories of that. But I think a lot of us also realize the importance of that interaction, the give and take, the discussions, the troubleshooting. This is kind of where a lot of this natural pedagogy, Gergely talks about information transmission between individuals kind of naturally teaches in really powerful ways. And our best resources for learning are those people around us. We know that kids prioritize and learn information better when they're given social cues. So there's some research with babies showing a human arm pointing at something versus a robot arm. Humans prioritize the information about the human arm, so even the little ones know the difference between that. We know that if we use a face versus, like if a face looks at something versus an arrow points at it, kids will learn what the face looks at, not just what something is pointing at. So it's not like just an intentional thing. It's actually about kids being tuned in naturally to learn from other people. We know that parents' contingent responses to a baby's vocal play support language development, so we know how good parents are at that. We don't think a lot about vocal play, right? But any of you have seen the magic of it to learning to speak. It's play in a really funny way, but that contingency, that social interaction is really important there as well. And they've actually done a really cool study looking at this was in a school-based setting, but they looked at kids' ability to build structures, and the structure that they built with other kids was better than the structure that they could have built on their own. Again, people who are in the classroom know this already. But I think what's crucial here is thinking about how are all those things that we do know work. We know it from our personal experience, we know it from research. How do we bring those together? And I think, honestly, that play is the way that it does that. Play naturally harnesses that active engagement, the social interaction, the minds-on thinking. It talks about the iterative, that iteration is play. It's playing with ideas and playing with outcomes. And what we see is that iteration is really crucial. And that's, I think, where you come in terms of the work that we're doing. And I think that's where there needs to be at least somewhat of a revolution in terms of how schools think about play, right? Schools, and I understand why. Schools are worried about learning outcomes. I get it. And what I think is it requires a little bit of a leap of faith to throw it into this idea of playful learning. But research actually suggests that playful learning is what is going to make it work. And I think that's where having people who are advocating for that is really important. So it brings us to how do we take kids from what we might see today. And maybe this is a little dramatic. I mean, I doubt most of our kids and students aren't holding up little help signs, but this is a stock photo I could find, right? But kids are kind of in this world where it's about outcomes. I was talking to my niece between 3rd and 4th grade. So in the United States, it's all about assessment and testing. And I said, so what are you excited about for 4th grade? And she goes, well, I know that I have to do the PSSA sciences. That's the only thing she could think about is the new school year, is what the new standardized testing was going to be. And the standardized testing is 2 straight weeks of standardized testing. And what they learn all year leads up to those 2 weeks. I think most people would suggest that that's not what we should be doing, but it's exactly what we are doing. And I think playful learning is a way to bring back some of that joy into our classrooms and also into our daily lives. So whether that's in more informal and that other 80% of time, how do we bring playful experiences back to kids? And again, it goes with this balance between kids and adults. So when we think about kids and adults, we can think about kids playing on their own and initiating and doing their own thing without any direction. We have benefits from free play for sure. But when we think about learning content, whether that's literacy, numeracy, self-regulation, music, any of that, that guided play, when adults play a supporting role, kind of help set that mise en place, kind of give kids the tools that they need, that is where the magic happens for learning. And that's what brings the joy back to classrooms, but it's also what brings the joy back to how can kids and families play together about anything. And I like this quote by Erik Erikson: "The playing adult steps sideward into another reality. The playing child advances forward to new stages of mastery." So this whole idea that play leads to learning is not something new, but it's something that I think we really are all focusing on because we see so many things going against what we internally know to be true about how kids learn. But what we're seeing in terms of the context that kids are given, in many ways, does not actually align with what we know. So my hope is that over the next 3 days, I get to learn a lot from you and play with some ideas with all of you, and thinking about how to leverage the other 80% of children's time with this goal, with this music goal. And I think what it comes down to is thinking about how the experiences we're giving kids, how the games that we're talking about kids playing with or without technology, in informal or formal context, how does that harness actively engaged, meaningful, social interaction, iterative, and joyful experiences. And I think we can think about that in terms of content, but then to go completely full circle, we can think about that in terms of how it helps prepare kids for success in the 21st century, when content isn't the issue. Content's a piece of it. Kids need to know something, right? But we can Google for a lot of information, but how do you get the collaborative skills? How do you get the critical thinking? I see this with my college students all the time. The ability to critically think is lacking. And I think part of that is because we've had kids grow up for so long in a world that's just focused on getting this assessment done, getting this assessment done, getting this assessment done, and not taking a step back and thinking about how do you sift through information and come up with new ideas. So sure, in addition to the content, we need the collaboration, the communication, the critical thinking, confidence, something else I see really lacking in my college classrooms, and creative innovation. And if you're like me, you look at this list and you basically see kind of the recipe for play. What play builds are those exact skills that kids need. And I think that that's where we can spend the next couple of days thinking about how do you harness all of this in really powerful ways that help kids both internally in terms of music, but also in terms of their lives, their livelihood, their happiness, their joy as individuals today, and for a future that we can't even imagine. So there's my story. So thank you.
So, thank you very much.
Sure.
Very interesting. So, est-ce que vous avez des questions? Do you have some questions? Vous pouvez les poser en français, je vais traduire, pas de problème.
Now you are like my college students. But you stayed awake, so that's better, that's good. And no one was on their phone, that was good.
Jean-Philippe, est-ce qu'il y a des questions?
Il n'y a pas de questions sur le chat.
OK. Oui? Yes.
Can you play and not learn anything? And if so, how much of that learning aspect do you get to play? Because I think that if considering designing something for teaching some aspect of music, there's a problem between how much of that information you want to embed into the game. And I think it's a tricky balance of how much of the learning aspect and the play aspect comes together.
Right, and I think you hit a really interesting point, one that I hadn't talked too much about, which is that the amount of, if you're familiar with the term scaffolding, like the amount of scaffolding that you give kids, the structure, the kind of that support, the less kids know, sometimes the more you need to give them, right? So you can't expect kids to play and learn the alphabet. You know, there's some of this kind of base knowledge that they need, and that's when if you're working with people who are really beginners, you might need to build in a little bit more than you would with someone who knows the basics and needs to be able to play around with that content. So I think, I would argue that probably kids learn from, kids learn all the time. They're little learning machines. I think kids learn from everything and anything that they do. But where the challenge is how much of that 10% or 20% is kind of guided by the adult or someone or the teacher, how much of that is guided versus how much of that kids discover. And I think that's going to change based off of what kids know and how much base knowledge they have. Does that make sense? Somewhat? Okay. It's a challenge, right? And I think that's when people think about play and learning, I think that's a challenge. If you think about it as two completely separate things, it becomes like this, like how much play and how much learning and how do you force them together. And I think it's more about the stance that happens in the middle. And this is going to be flexible based off of what kids know, the skill set of the teacher, what you're trying to get them to learn.
Yes?
It's just an observation that it's very interesting to think that actually lots of school boards or governments or those who sort of like set tests are actually more interested in things which are measurable. And lots of what you're talking about isn't measurable, but actually is very crucial for learning and for skill development and for cooperation, etc. So for me, the challenge is how can we make people who decide what our children should learn, to realise that actually this doesn't need to be measured, but it needs to take place alongside the things that they would like to measure.
I mean, it's hard too because some of the things that you can measure, so if you go back and think about like the literacy, the numeracy, that kind of stuff that you can measure, I'd argue that playful learning gets you there just as much, if not more, than the direct instruction testing over and over. But when it comes to, one of the things that the education world is dealing with is how do you measure things like collaboration in a second grader? I mean, we can all see it, but how do you measure it and put it on a report card? And I think that's where the balance is happening. We even see this happening with creativity. So what does creativity mean and how do you measure it is something that the field is still struggling with. We all see it, but how do you measure it? And I think that's a really good point because we're asking school boards and governments to take a risk. And we need to be able to show, and I think that's one thing where the science of learning can start to do that, is to show scientifically that this kind of playful learning leads to increased learning outcomes.
So a bit by the end of your presentation, you were talking about, there were like 4 circles, and it was saying kind of went a bit fast in that part. I saw that if the kid initiated the game, they would be more focused. Is that what you were saying? If they were the one initiating the game. So how do you, as a teacher or as you're trying to make them learn something, guide them toward a goal if you let them initiate it?
I think it comes back to the magic of guided play and the thing that is it constrains that space. So if you can get kids to want to buy into the game that you're playing, the learning goals that you have in mind kind of come from the design of that game, from the content and the way that you've designed it. What we worry about is when it's you must play this game and that you have no choice and no agency in it. We all know when we try to make kids do something they don't want to do, they shut down, right? You just see their eyes close, even their body posture will sometimes change when we're saying like, you must do this thing. And I think what the great thing with things like games and guided play is you give kids that agency back. And again, you can't expect the kid to design the game, but you can design a game that's fun that they'll want to play. And this other stuff comes for free with it. Does that make
So you let like a free part of the rules to be determined by kids. You just give them like a goal to reach, and let's try to find a way to achieve it together.
Right, and I think that's what you see with like this gamification stuff that's happening in education across the board, is this idea that if you give kids a reason to be intrinsically motivated, if you give kids a reason to want to play, whether that's to discover something or to come out with some outcome that they're motivated to get to, they're going to learn as they get there, but they're the ones who are motivated. We're not forcing them to do it.
Okay, thank you.
D'autres questions, other questions? Andrea?
Thank you for your presentation. So I'm sitting here and your presentation is fabulous and fabulous ideas, but I'm overcome by this feeling of kind of fatigue because, so I'm a child who's educated in the 60s, the early 60s, in
So my initial reaction to that is part of the reason that we still see this kind of this play versus learning, and why are we still fighting the same fight that we've been fighting for a long time, is because we haven't been as specific before about what play looks like, and that there's different kinds of play, and play can be enriched with really important content. I think that lots of people who don't study this think play is kids in a room, play, figure it out. And if that's what you think playful learning is, that doesn't lead to the outcomes you want. I think if we can start to think about what does guided play look like, and how does this guided, it takes kind of, it gives the adults or the schools a little bit more responsibility. Here's the kinds of stuff we want you to learn, and we're going to embed that in playful experiences, but it's not just free play. I think that people making decisions just assume it's like kids in a room with some books, and we say, learn the curriculum for 3rd grade. And that's not what guided play really is. Does that make, you're not convinced?
No, I agree with everything you say. I just feel this sort of sense of despair, because I think we did know a lot in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and so on about play and power of play, and particularly within the sort of paradigm of discovery learning. And what I don't know is what we need to do in terms of harnessing knowledge and somehow advocating. I just don't know what the answer is. I'm wondering why we're still having these.
I think
I'm
part
not
of
really
it.
expecting you to imagine an answer, but it's just an issue to raise at the start of this conference.
I don't know, but maybe I can just add something about it. I think we have the responsibilities as member of faculties to integrate that in our training too, because we're focusing very much on expertise and expertise all the time, and I'm not sure that we are focusing that much about how we can integrate learning through play in our faculties. I think it's the babies should be there.
Right, and I think part of the focus on assessment has made people take a lot of steps back. And I think, I do some work with the local children's museum, and I was walking through with the director, and they do a great job of playful learning. It's great. And there was a board member, and I introduced myself to the board member, and they said, well, it's great that they were playing, but what are they learning? You were on the board of the children's museum. How are you asking me this question? And I think part of it is also adults are living in such a fast-paced life that most of them don't take the time to play to think about what that is doing to their lives, and we're so fast-paced, and people don't want to take any risks with their kids, and they just think this easy drill and kill kind of, here's the way it's going to be, you're going to do this thing, and you're going to take these tests for 3 weeks. They're a little bit afraid, but you're right, we have lots of research, and I think it's about also coming out of our silos. But you have folks doing educational research, you have folks doing early cognitive research, and then you have the people making decisions. And I think part of it comes down to advocacy. For so many years, people just kind of do their own research or have their own experience, but it's about figuring out how to have a collaboration, like an international collaboration of people who are invested, that have real hard science to back them up, that can make really compelling arguments.
Just to say, I think the assessment piece is very important. And I mean, my view is that we can't make assessment go away. We have to live with assessment. And assessment, so I think what we need to do is make it creatively about how assessment can live comfortably with learning through play, and what assessment needs to look like.
Last question, Michiko.
I'd like to pull together their 2 questions somehow. I hear this from my students all, especially in high school, who I've known since they were 6, and my piano students, and they say the testing is just brutal. And they don't complain about the classroom part when they come to the lesson. So why can't the testing be more like play?
I'm voting for you. I'm voting for you.
Because then the children, it's when they're feeling tested, we all freeze up. We can't, and some, just my sister never could take tests. She's excellent, she's right, but testing just threw her completely off, and I think a lot of people identify with that. So if that whole system of the assessment were reevaluated, because yes, they think, okay, if we check the right box at the ABC and we score enough to get a percentage, then we're going to say, okay, this has been a successful student in this particular program. But maybe we need more human assessment when the child is playing with it, because the adult is playing, so that it will be a little bit swayed by what the person thinks. But that's what we all really like, is what other people think of us. Constantly.
And you see, even Montessori thought about that, right? About the documentation, rather than here's the test for 2 weeks.
So what I don't want to blow my own horn here at all, but my games, we have teaching games, and then we have memory games, and they're memory games children play together, the teacher's not as involved, and she's assessing to know whether or not to go on with the subjects more. So the children never feel like they're being tested, but they constantly are by the guided teacher who should be the authority on the subject and cares about the students. So these random tests that some PhD person, excuse me, I don't mean to insult anybody, maybe that's where we need to look, that we're doing okay. We're not having the same discussion about making learning playful and all these joy things, etc., all these wonderful things you said. Maybe we need to look farther down the path and look at the end part, so we don't scare the kids and judge them, rate them, give them a score and a personal assessment. If we all walked in today and Francis looked at us and said, oh, okay, because of what you're wearing, I'm going to give you this score and now come in let's talk. We don't get graded like that all the time as adults. It would be horrible for you.
I have to be the bad guy. So, but we have times during lunch and activities to continue the discussions. So I invite now Margarida Romero, who also set the tables about topics we will have during the next 3 years at university. And she will talk about learning through play for or against each other, promoting collaborative learning and digital game-based learning. Margarida was a professor at Valladolid University for many years, and she left for the south of France. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Francis, and I'm really excited to be here with you. Then when Francis sent me the program, it was like, oh, I'm so excited. Persons are reading, for example, the Lego group reports or the work you are doing on co-creation. And instead, music is not my field, but I'm really, really happy to be here. And this was, this is not. No problem.
Il entend mieux sur
Ah, sorry?
Ouais. Je vais mettre une
Okay, this is okay.
Ah, tu l'as déjà?
Oui, I'm okay. Then as Jennifer, I'm not a music person. Then I'm almost harmonious and musical, and this was part of the things I was lacking on the childhood, and things that I really enjoy, but I'm very bad at. Then I will learn a lot from you on the persons who are you on the music side. My research is in learning, on the learning science, but I'm not a pure learning science person. I'm coming from multimedia studies, but also computer science studies, then I am kind of a mix of jack of all trades from different fields. That for me it's totally okay because what we are looking at research are things that are really interconnected from different places. Then I'm now working at NIS, that is nice. Then this is part of the team, and I was really having a good time here in Quebec, working at the Faculté de Sciences et d'Éducation. You have to see the two towers. Then there was one of the towers, the Faculté d'Éducation, and teaching a course on game design that we really enjoyed during many years to work with different students on. But I had a crazy opportunity to run a lab on the south of France, and I was sharing this idea with my husband. Was like, you go there. Then, okay, then first I want to know who plays a musical instrument. In case you play, you play solo, you raise your right hand. In case you play in a battle group, your left hand. And so many fingers as instruments you play. Okay, wow. Then we have like different configurations. Excellent. And this is a question I enjoy a lot to ask because having this kind of not unique background, part of the communities I'm working on is the robotic community. Robotics that are persons working from, who is a very interdisciplinary community. Then one of the questions I'm asking to these persons who have developed an expertise on robotics is what they did play when they were kids. The similar question as Jennifer was told. Then we want to know if you are on the past playing these building things, or currently now who is playing these things on the past, who played on the past, and who are currently still playing on bricks, Lego bricks, Mechanos, electronics, city models, tree houses. Okay, some of you still play? Okay, excellent. Okay, then the work I'm developing within the lab, and the work that was purely developed is on the co-creation. And the idea is that this co-creation happens with different tools, then different medias, different strategies, and three of the aspects we are looking at is on game design, creative robotics, and creative programming. And the word creative is super important because sometimes there's a guidance that is beyond what is proposing. Jennifer just proposed that it's a guidance that is like very step-by-step things. Then what we are looking is at activities that have a certain degree of creative freedom that allows kids to develop a process and a solution that is not well known in advance. Then we are not interested in ultra-guided activities in which there's step-by-step guidance, but the way kids can solve problems, and we are interested also in the meaningful and societal problems to solve through these different elements, and intermixing them. Then maker education is like combining these different ways of creating solutions, and there's the scope or the perimeter we are working on. Then this falls into a way of considering the creative uses of technologies, separated from just using technologies for a specific pre-established way of working. Okay. Then the idea in this presentation is to go further on this idea of creative collaboration. And as was in the discussion before, creativity is super hard to assess. That is maybe the reason this is not still on the standardized obsession of the different curriculums. And maybe one of the reasons is that the creativity is very context related. And when there's context related, it could shapes into different ways. And we need to take into consideration the task and the context and the value for the community of the solutions. Then this is not because it's hard and we have been prevented by other colleagues that creative resources like the Kill Road, that we are not going in this direction. Then our work in the lab, we are 5 colleagues going through this aspect of creative research, how to support and how to provide feedback and assessment on creativity, especially on collaborative learning settings. And despite we are not having, we maybe never we will catch the perfect fish, we are like creating fishing nets that are sometimes bringing things that are partial, but helps us to go closer to what we think about, what we can consider about creative collaboration. And the games inside that, then we are having the 5 aspects that Jennifer and the colleagues from the LEGO team were proposing. These are part also of the structure of the different game perspective we were considering when reviewing the literature on game-based learning. And this is very small, but for those coming for the workshop tomorrow, we were going further on this on these different pieces. Then this puzzle is about considering that when we are talking about game-based learning, is much more complicated than just considering this is very diverse. It's not complicated, it's very diverse. Then the ways, the game design perspective are full corpus of research. There's also the research that is focusing on how to integrate these games into the schools and how to integrate it into the classroom setting or informal settings. The learning experience and all these aspects are separated, and often we are going too fast and saying games are good for this or games are good for that. What we want to go is to go further and say this game mechanic in this specific context will help on that. Then it's going to a more detailed level of describing games and learning in a way we can compare peers with peers and apples with apples. Then going further, the idea of play and games as a general thing, but going further on specifically on the game mechanics and the game dynamics. Okay, this is part of the elements I will introduce. Then first, creativity. What is for you creativity? Then any of you have a super definition of that? Who wants to share? Yeah.
Something new to you, therefore love creativity, but something that's new to you is valuable.
Oh, fantastic. Then original and valuable. We are having here 2 of the criteria that research has raised up is the notion of originality, but also value for a given situation. Then my grandpa was having creative ideas, but his creative ideas were within his context. Then idea was inventing something that already existed. Okay, then that was creative, but it was not valuable on a certain socio-temporal context. Then creativity is always within a context. What is creative for a 4th grade class is not the same what will be creative in a top industry level. Okay, then the group of reference assessing what is creativity is important, and this is something that is super contextual. We are basing a part of our works on the work of Mishra, an idea that this creativity as an acting way of creating something that is embedded within a system and is evaluated within a system. Then maybe what is creative for a 4th grade class in a certain context will be not the same that what will be considered as creative in another context. Then we are assuming that if we are considering creativity within groups and in the classroom, we will maybe not have psychometrical validated instruments for assessing what is a creative solution. because this is socially shared. If you are looking at creativity as an intra-personal, intra-psychological perspective, then we are having all the work that has been done by Sternberg, and many others that are assessing creativity from an individual perspective. Okay, then this is not opposing these approaches. This is bringing another perspective that we are having the individual creativity, but when we are co-creating together, we are having other aspects that needs to be considered within a system. Then maybe some of you has seen Buona. Then we have here Maui, he's a shapeshifter. Then when I'm thinking on creativity, I'm often thinking of him. Then he has different characteristics, but he's adapting to the environment and the problem. And he's being creative in adapting, and at the same time maintaining a certain identity. Then this is one of the aspects. Creativity is not being the same at the same context, and that brings another aspect is that maybe we cannot say a kid that he is a creative person. Maybe we can move into the idea that we should consider that within this activity you have been creative and your peers have considered you as that your solution, your process and your solution has been creative. Then it's not something we will badge an award saying I have a creative badge, because this is not a permanent thing. This is something that is like a physical activity. It's a performance thing that is happening within a certain context. Then we cannot maybe say we have a creativity level 1, level 2, level 3, because it's also about the attitude and the way we are engaging in an activity in a certain context. That means that we cannot grade forever. We can recognize that in a certain activity, in a certain moment, a person has been creative, but we cannot ensure that this person will be creative, especially in team-based settings, in another context. Okay? Then this is another aspect that is problematic, is when we want to catch fishes and have the fish on a certain vocal for forever. You got this specific math content and we can check that you got it. Maybe for these transversal competencies, we cannot consider that because a person has been behaving in a certain way in a certain activity, these persons will behave in the same way in another activity. Okay? Then, as you were introducing the creativity as a way to find different solutions, and this is a task we love to propose, is that the Guilford task on thinking about the chair, how many uses it will have. Okay, but also considering how context is shaping these ideas. And when you are using the Guilford task among industrial professionals, they are not providing the solution. Then context is super important, and how our experiences and our prior knowledge is shaping the solutions we are providing is also important. Then there's the cultural aspect that is also there. Then one of the aspects we are currently working on is on the social cultural factors in creativity. Then how, from the analysis of a given problem situation into the iterative process of creating a solution, these social cultural factors in a team that will have a diversity of social cultural backgrounds and knowledge, prior knowledge, and others are mixing together into a solution. Okay? Other aspect, and the last aspect of creativity, is that sometimes there has been efforts to evaluate it automatically. This is a tendency of humans. We want to automatize things. We dream of this idea of making things easier. But we take fun of having a big group of students, more than 100 students, creating games, amateur games on Scratch. And then we assessed their productions through an automatic assessment tool, DoctorSpot, and also manually using criteria that are contextually based. What we are having is very clearly that we are having, one, a better appreciation of the productions, when this is a human that is working on rubrics and criteria that are considering the context of the production, that when we were creating automatically based on different features. But also we are having a wider spectrum. Then maybe there's an issue in education and creativity if we want to over-rationalize processes and we want to industrialize education. Creativity is something that is difficult to industrialize and to automatize. Okay. This is also a superpower because that makes it different from machines. Okay. Then there's a tension that you were raising also, that is that how still there's a tendency of education to want to organize things, control things, evaluate, assess, etc. And the aspect that creativity means slow education, because we need context, because we need to consider the process, we need to consider the appreciation from colleagues, then this is not going in the direction of standardizing things and optimizing things. Okay, and then the question we have a long time being behind that is that can technology support the creative collaboration? Then I'm looking at this tension that Jennifer was also addressing, that there's a lot of edtechs that are low quality, that are just drill and kill things with the pre-established elements that even makes more reduced the spectrum of the knowledge that the kid could have in an analogical context. Then there could be a risk of going to create educational resources that will replace what are doing teachers when creating specific resources for their classes. In France, there has been a big investment on educational resources, big investment, and this big investment has been like, we will produce the best resources for the teachers. Teachers are not using that. They have no time to find the best resources because there's a lot. And second, the teachers that are committed to quality want tailored ad hoc experiences for their kids. Then this is not meeting anyone, and they were super stressed because there has been a lot of investment. And then the idea is to go on the opposite way, is how we create affordances for the kids, for the teachers, to provide them tools to create things that are meaningful for them in a specific context. But that means, and I'm talking from the tensions in the French perspective of education, that means that we give control to the educational system actors. Okay. Then when you have a very centralized educational system, very top-down, this is another tension that is inside. You want everything to be controlled from the top to the down, and then instead of proposing alternatives and choices, you try with the researchers selected from the very evidence-based perspective to find the specific resources that are the best recipe for the most of the learners. But this is a way of thinking education as really, well, pre-established thing and not community inquiry into knowledge. Then there's also something that is appearing. Then when we were working on these uses of technologies, one of the work we went from is that key and colleagues that are working on this active engagement perspective are considering how persons are engaging into learning. We went on to the creative engagement with the technologies. What we are doing with technologies? Are we just consuming that as pre-established content that will be obsolete in a certain way? Or are we having technologies we can create with? Are these technologies we can create with for teams? Are there for communities? Then we tried, and this was mostly for teaching purposes, to try to show future teachers about different ways of considering technology and considering are technologies we are using able to support you in just passing information, this e-burst, flipped classroom tendency of canning, putting in a can contents and then having these educational resources? Are you just doing an interactive usage of the technologies by allowing the learner to click and something, or are you engaging the learners in content creation? Okay. Then when considering the music perspective, there's even more perspectives, because when considering music, it's not only about how you select or create or edit different ways of art with pre-existing pieces of music, but also it's also about playing, it's also about creating, and the spectrum that is between the play and the creation perspective that is like sometimes modding a little bit or adapting. Okay, then there's a lot of perspective. Then one of the aspects we have been looking into for a research perspective is the intergenerational creative programming workshops. The idea is to bring in persons, as was proposed by Francis, from different backgrounds, from different ages, and going together to solve a problem from the community, and put the problem on the first and technology on the second, and engage them on creating things through technology. The idea behind that is to go not only on developing certain knowledge and competencies and confidence, as also you were pointing on, confidence, and we master the tools we are using, we are not just consumers, but also on helping on developing a techno-creative citizenship that is not just we are unhappy about things, we have the possibility to engage in communities to transform things. Then developing this creative and critic ownership of the tools we are using, on digital tools, is for us a very important aspect on the agenda, that is not allowing anyone explaining that artificial intelligence will transform anything. It's not about asking persons for understanding what is the algorithm behind the service they are using, and making persons very aware about the intentions that could be behind this idea of putting technologies in a black box. Okay, and this was just on the here in the campus. Then the competition that is a mix of competition and cooperation, and there were primary kids from a village near Quebec that were creating their own frog for addressing développement durable, eco-friendly solutions to the community, and they were super happy. Okay, and then the last aspect of this collaboration and games, and then the intersection of the research is at the same time on CSCL, computer support collaborative learning, but also on game-based learning, when there's a big corpus of research behind that. And one of the aspects we were looking at is when we are playing together, what are the mechanisms and what are the actual dynamics that are behind that? Are we engaging in sharing a common goal, or are we competing against each other? What are these different ways of being together within a game? Okay. Then when we are on games, most of the times we are having this at the same time the individual dimension, the small group, other groups that will be in competition or on cooperation with our group, and sometimes the crowd perspective on games. Okay. Then if we are considering this idea of challenge, also translated as competition in some ways, in a positive competition, we are playing for achieving a goal. Then this is a personal challenge for ourselves, and we are competing. We are competing with ourselves. We can compete with another person, or we can compete with other persons. Then this idea of competition and challenges, it has been having bad press, but we can reshape it in a way, in the way that we implement it, in a way that is positive. It's not against the others and for being better than the others, but it could be a mechanism that could be engaging in making things better, and doing this playful effort that could be interesting to go through. And it's about how we implement correctly these challenging and competing things, instead of saying, no, no, we are just going through cooperation. Okay? Then when we are looking at how to implement and support collaborative learning into games, we should consider at the same time user experience, the gameplay, the storytelling, what is the goal or the main meta objectives to go through, and the collaborative learning aspects on that. Okay. Then what are we having as from very even ancient research on collaborative learning is that these cooperative learning situations can lead to a healthier process, and we are having also data now from educational robotic tasks that is when together teams are more resilient than when we are giving complex tasks to a unique individual. That makes sense. We can sometimes give up if we are alone and we doubt of our capacity to solve the task. But when we are in teams, we develop a higher levels of self-esteem. Then a lot of interactions are cooperative interactions live, and you were providing this idea of washing things together. And there's also an ethical and an axiology also on this cooperation. We should learn to cooperate, and this is not happening naturally. Then different ways of doing that on inter-individual competition, then individuals competing against each other. And this, there was a paper recently on the dark sides of gamification. This is a mechanism that is not always leading to a good learning experience, and either to engage in better performances. Then now that there's enough research on these different gamification elements, we know that the leaderboards and the points and the things that are comparing learners from each other are working for those who are winners, but are unmotivating those who are not on the winning side. Then we should be very careful about how we provide feedback, and how we provide feedback in a way that is stimulating persons and not making them feel that they are less good than others. Okay. The other mechanism that is appearing to be interesting is this inter-group cooperation and inter-group competition, that is developing cooperation inside the group, but competing, being challenged by other groups. And after doing that from a research perspective, someone was saying, oh, but this is happening all the time in the most popular sports. Yes. This is what happens in hockey and what happens in soccer and many other sports, is that there's inter-group cooperation and this inter-group competition, that mixing this mechanism at different levels could be something interesting too, because we are at the same time on this cooperative mechanism that helps learners to share knowledge and share resources, but at the same time they are challenged in not just, okay, we are good at team, other teams are doing the same process, and there could be a comparison or there could be a way to stimulate teams from each other. Okay. Then we were developing this work also from different ages perspective, and I'd like to also, in case you're interested on this intergenerational perspective, we were looking at how this play happens, and is very studied on early stages of development as a way to understand the world around us, but also how seniors are engaging in games and going beyond the stereotypes that older persons doesn't play. We have a great diversity of players among the different age groups. And also when we are looking at the results of the workshops we are running, there's really, really amazing things, and things that are not age related in the way we create games and the way we play games. Well, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have some questions? before the coffee break. Andrea. Okay, so anyhow, you can continue to talk with you during the coffee break or during the lunch. So the coffee break is just at the entrance here. We try to make it not too long because we are already a bit behind our schedule. Donc, on va passer à la pause café. Si vous avez des questions à poser à Magda, donc vous pouvez le faire pendant la pause café, etc. Donc, c'est juste ici. Et on reprend dans 30 minutes. C'est 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Ouais. Et So we continue now with Dr. Ashton. She's also from Penn State University, and she will present something about the Going Music Map. So what do we know regarding learning music through? Thank you very much.
Bonjour, it's me. Hello. Bonjour, hi, for those from Montreal. It's controversial, guys. Guten Morgen, buenos dias. It's so exciting to be here. I'm very honored to be with this amazing group of scholars. And we're here to kind of break down those silos and share with one another. My name is Ann Clements from Penn State University. I am faculty in music education, and I'm the director of the Center for Pedagogy in Arts and Design. And I come from a teaching background that resides mainly inside of schools, but the majority of my research on games and gaming have occurred outside the school building. This presentation will address some of the challenges that I believe we face in implementing playful games for children in the music classroom. It's based on a variety of research from education, from music, from games, and beyond. And I'd love to start with a roadmap of sorts so that you know where I'm going. We're going to start today with the situating of play and games, which Jennifer had done so beautifully this morning. We'll spend too brief a time on that, I'm sure. And then we're going to talk about authenticity, purpose and motivation, and failure. And as you all know, play and games are intertwined. And as Jennifer also alluded to this morning, the developmental sequence of play is hierarchical, with the highest level being gameplay with rules. Social participation in play is also hierarchical, with cooperation received and perceived as the highest form of engagement. Play and games are beneficial to the learning of a broad variety of skills and behaviors. The value of games is their authentic connection to being human and human life. The truth is, humans learn through experiences in the world. They do not learn through experiences in classrooms or books unless these experiences are based on ideas and encounters that are real and that matter. Classrooms should not be a bunch of game manuals without the games. To teach is to empower people, and meaningful games are an incredible tool for doing so. Games and music have a shared history that dates back to ancient human past. They're two of the oldest forms of human social interaction. In terms of evolution, if you have no capacity to learn, you wouldn't be with us, because learning at its best should be a joy and a pleasure. It's really only in schools that people can find it to be a pain. But we know that the joy of learning can be revived because the commercial gaming industry has found a way to make learning profitable. In the right setting, we can recover this primordial love that humans have for learning. I'm going to talk about play and learning and games in some unique ways, and I thought I would just share the definition that I find to be very clean and simple defining a game. This is from Jane McGonigal, and she states here that the goal of a game, the 4 attributes of a game are the goal, a specific outcome players reach to achieve, 2, rules, limitations set upon how players can achieve the goal, 3, a feedback system, which tells players how close they are to achieving the goal, and 4, voluntary participation. Everyone who is playing the game knowingly and willingly accepts the goals, the rules, and the feedback. The key to game play is unnecessary obstacles. That means that the freedom to work in the most logical and the most efficient way is the very opposite of gameplay. And of course, as you all know, while many people see games at best as simply a form of escapism, or at worst a completely mind-numbing waste of time, or even a corrupting force, games are serious. In 2010, more than 57,000 gamers were listed as co-authors for the research paper in the prestigious scientific journal Nature, The gamers with no previous background in biochemistry had worked in a 3D game environment called Folded, folding virtual proteins in ways that could help cure cancer and prevent Alzheimer's. But not all games are created equal. I'd like to share for you, if you put your things on YouTube, Know the World will explore and examine them. So this is a video from an American classroom where a game of sorts is being played.
We are dancing in the forest, and when you're out, okay? You're flying dancing, start dancing. Alright, we are dancing in the forest, what is far away. Marie? I didn't know that we were playing. Oh, you didn't? Okay. We are dancing in the forest, what is far away. Elsa, you're out, sweetie. Alright. But you can sing in here if you want to. Alright. We are dancing in the forest.
That's probably enough of a sample. I have a hard time understanding this game. What is its value? What musical activity is happening here? Who is in charge of gameplay? What is the quality of the feedback? I do believe that meaningful games are tremendously important in music teaching and learning, especially formal music teaching and learning, which is often built upon the artificial ethos of excellence. Too often, achievement and freedom in music classes is for the lucky few and results in alienation for far too many. So what makes some games more meaningful to players than others? What can games teach us about teaching music? I'd like to focus on the three areas of authenticity, purpose, and motivation, and the role of failure. Specifically in authenticity, I want to talk about being playful. I want to talk about the curse of knowledge. I want to talk about management, parameters, and constraints. Within purpose and motivation, which will include thinking and rethinking, urgent optimism, heroic purpose, and progress in meaningful work. And then in the role of failure, I'll talk about fun failure and rewards and punishment. So we'll start with authenticity. One of the problems that I observed in that video that we just watched was the lack of authenticity of the game being played. It wasn't a playground game. It's easy to think that children's play is simple, but it's not. As Catherine March, who has a history of studying children's games, said good play is complex, subjective, collaborative, and based on improvisation. It's a combination of rules and rhythms and movement and variations that are composed dynamically over time. She suggests that games must be playful and not play-like, which is a problem I think we saw in that last video. One of the challenges that music teachers face in terms of authenticity is the dreaded curse of knowledge. And I'd like to play a short game with all of you. So on my cue, I'd like to ask, let's just do it down the steps here. I'd like to ask this half of the room, when I tell you, you're going to shut your eyes, but don't do it yet. And then when your eyes are closed, a song title and lyrics will be placed on the screen. And I'd like this side of the room to tap or clap out the rhythm of the lyrics on the screen. When we're done, I'll have you open your eyes and guess what song we tapped. Are you ready? Okay, so close your eyes, please. No cheating. No cheating. You know this one? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, open your eyes. Does anyone have a guess? Familiar at all? Just throw it out there. Alex, did you have a guess? Oh, jeez Louise. Did anyone guess that? I got it in the screen. No, you didn't. Okay, let's switch it around. Thank you, Alex. It's always one in the class. So you all are going to clap, and you guys are going to close your eyes. Go ahead and close your eyes, please. Got this one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Wait, don't open your eyes. Okay, open your eyes. Any guesses as to what that was? No guesses at all. Anyone just throw something out? $20 on the table. Anyone? No? Interesting. Do you remember that song? I was trying to guess the age of the audience. I didn't put it on Rowan, but it was popular. So interesting. This is so interesting. In the 1990s, a Stanford University graduate student in psychology named Elizabeth Newton illustrated the curse of knowledge by studying this simple game of tappers and listeners. Over the course of Newton's experience, 120 songs were tapped out. Listeners guessed only 3 of those 120 songs correctly, which is a success ratio of 2.5%. But before they guessed, Newton asked the tappers to predict the probability that listeners would guess correctly. They predicted 50% of the time. In essence, the tappers got their message across 1 time in 40, but they thought they'd get it across 1 time in 2. Why? The problem is, once we know something, say the melody of a song, we find it hard to imagine that we don't know it. Our knowledge has cursed us. We find it difficult sharing it with others because we can't readily recreate their state of mind. Another problematic issue that stands in the way of playfulness in schools are built upon the concept of management. There are school board administrators, and that trickles down to the classroom, where often teachers are managers of their students' engagement and learning. Management is one of the greatest technologies we've ever had, but it's about compliance and control, which worked well when we needed it, but has utterly fallen apart in the 21st century. More and more, we need engagement, not compliance. And the technology of engagement is not management, it's self-direction. In this study, researchers asked 23 artists to select 10 commissioned works of art and 10 non-commissioned works of art, for a total of 460 original pieces. A commissioned piece of art is something that's been asked for by the person who will purchase it. I would like you to paint a painting. It's going to hang above my green couch, so I'd like to have some green in it. That is a commissioned piece. The researchers then invited art critics, gallery owners, and art faculty members to evaluate the art. And the conclusions were quite startling, in that while there was no discernible difference between the technical skills and overall quality demonstrated in the work, the commissioned works were considered to be significantly less creative. Wondering why this might be the case, they went back and interviewed all of the artists and discovered the same word being used over and over again. That word was constraints. Under constraints, the artists felt they could do a good job, but not a great job. For most of our lives as students, the work we do in school is commissioned work. How can we use games to expand parameters and reduce constraints in the music classroom? Daniel Pink, a very famous author of Drive, among other books, he suggests fostering authenticity through the 4T approach. Number 1, time. Allow students to choose when they do a task. Number 2, task. Allow them to have a voice in the task that is being created. 3, team. Who are they going to work with? Is that a decision we always have to make? And technique, how will they do it? Moving on to purpose and motivation. In a world full of complex systems that are counteracting with each other to give us more and more disasters, like our current economic state and cultural and military crossroads, we really want that game mentality and theory of intelligence. You're not intelligent because you rush to be efficient in a goal that you never rethought. You're intelligent when you've explored thoroughly and you've thought laterally and linearly, and, as in many modern games, done so collaboratively, when you have to compare and contrast your solutions while contributing your unique skill set. The goal of this game, what is it? Yes, it is. It's to save Princess Peach, right? And how do you do it? You move from left to right across the screen, but no one ever plays it that way. It's about discovery. It's about finding new directions and new approaches. What if there were this many interesting and discoverable options in the music classroom on any given day? In a good game, we are most successful when we have urgent optimism about the tasks at hand. This is the game Tetris. And what's interesting about Tetris, one of the most popular games of all time, is that there is no chance of ever winning this game. The only purpose is to put off dying for as long as you can. Why do people invest so much time in unwinnable games? We play because we are in control and we feel that we can be successful. We play because we know the rules and the rules are fair. We play because if we fail, we will of that. No.
Just to bring some perspective into
Yes.
this, to me, it teaches about self-regulation and focused attention. So when the teacher sings, the children move, and when the teacher stops singing, they have to stop moving. And the ones who aren't able to stop moving fast enough, they get eliminated from the game. So if I'm teaching my kids in an orphan ensemble or a quarter ensemble, and they have a hard time following the conductor, I will put everything down and we will play such a game, just to develop that reactivity, that focused attention. And it also uses the basic solfege, so, so, la, so, so, mi, so, so, la, so, mi. So it also preparation for teaching those pitches in solfege and the rhythmic component of A notes and quarter notes. So in my view, and as a full-time teacher, this is very in line with what we do. The purpose of this game is very, very anchored in the music itself.
I think that's very interesting, and I appreciate that question. I would have to respond very broadly and say, students, you know, if you were talking about note high, limited note range, right? Sol, mi, sol, la, sol, mi. Should that be the foundational elements of what we're doing in a music classroom? I just call into question the approaches that we use and the reason why we use them. I don't see anything wrong, and I apologize if I've over-dramatized this particular game. But if we're saying students 30 minutes a week, once a week, is this the best game to bring forward? I have to question that, and maybe that's just a difference in philosophy. And I think that's really kind of at the core of this. But again, my question is this the best activity with the limited time we have with children to do the most amount of music teaching? I think it's just a difference in the way we see this. Thank you.
Another question? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll continue now with Carrie Vidland. Carrie Vidland. So she's a professor at the University of Western Ontario, and she will present a study she did about online children's musical play implication of convergence.
Pardon?
Not loud enough. Sorry.
It's okay. How do I do this?
I'm not sure you can create the sound. Maybe you will have to talk a little bit louder. Or okay, good. Thank you.
All right. It's an honor to be here, as I said, and thanks to Francis and his colleagues here at LaVey for hosting this event. This presentation explores adaptive aspects of music transmission through children's musical play. And so we're looking at something that's traditional, that is informal. We're not looking at something that gamers have devised. We're looking at something old and how it has changed over time. And central to this research is the question of what remains and what changes when games are played through, when games are shared through social media. This is from India. Study while searching YouTube for music to use with an elementary methods class. I was an elementary music teacher and I wanted a little bit more to bring them. But then I became fascinated by what I found, which was endless and goofy and magical. And the thing that struck me so forcefully was that the children in these videos were sharing their music with each other. Some of them, but most of them not mediated by adults. For the most part, they were engaged within the world of children, and it seemed as if I was observing a continuity in long-standing child lore practices, and that such child play had coexisted along any structured music education forever. I kept watching, and after several months it became clear that this was a rabbit hole with no end. And so I asked colleagues to join me. I want to acknowledge my friends in this collective work. No, here we go. Nathan Cruzy, Stephen Messenger, and Meredith Latane. And I brought them here with me today. That's Nathan in the blue shirt, Stephen in the middle, and Meredith to the right. Or, yeah, to the right. The living tradition. Thanks. It's okay? What did I do? All right. The living traditions that shape children begin early as shared values and knowledge passed on by word of mouth, observation, and imitation. While these older ways incorporate conservative elements that stay constant through time, they're also dynamic and adaptive forces at play, allowing traditions to breathe and become contemporary. And as we know, play is considered to be part of the way in which a younger person becomes part of the social framework. Montessori, Vygotsky, Bruner, Piaget, lots and lots of people have talked about this. Custodero, Calais, and Diaz Donoso in 2016
documented benefits of musical play in child development, and they write that music making can provide children with cultural tools that are necessary for them to make sense of what's happening around them, and that such music making helps them work collaboratively with others. So collaboratively with others is part of this clapping games thing. So notice the adult in this clip, or the adults in this clip taken at a barbecue. This is so tiny. Recent efforts have turned from collecting oral folkloric traditions as artifacts to the realization that children are active participants in receiving, teaching, and shaping their games and music, and that the processes of doing so are active and they're generative ones. And March 2008 and many others have been documenting the active shaping part. Opportunities for creativity, innovation, complexity, and expertise abound as old elements are juxtaposed with novel ones. And of course we can see this throughout clapping games, but there are other kinds of games. This one is, we'll be looking at those in particular. Found worldwide, clapping games invite competition and cooperation as they incorporate tests of skill, coordination, repetition, improvisation, and memory. In her study of South African children's games, Harrop Allen, 2017, writes that they create clapping games by using bits and pieces from all over the place, and that this is characteristic of the ways in which children do this all over the world. In English-speaking countries, clapping games tend to be the domain of little girls, although this is not a firm distinction, nor is it everywhere, as seen in this example from Nigeria. Clapping games may be found in the scenes between structured activities. An essential part of the games is the rhythmic accompaniment, the claps, which can be highly complex, particularly when the rhyming words and melodies differ from the hand clap metric structure, as commented on here by Meryl Mirsky in 1988. And she was looking in particular at Dr. Pepper, a game that's drawn from a commercial image, a commercial. Here are two sisters in Mexico playing Dr. Pepper. And I'd like you to notice that one of them in particular is interested in the provenance of the games. She wants to know where it came from, and she's interested in who she got it from and in the geographic location. So in a small way, she's sort of collecting. She has a kind of a collecting instinct here. No. I'm sorry, it's really tiny. Here we go.
I'm Phoebe. And I'm Maeve. And we're going to show you how we do Dr. Pepper. And we learned it from our friend Kira. She learned it from our teacher. And she's one of our friends who lives in Houston, Texas. And we met her in Mexico. What a coincidence. I drink Dr. Pepper, so it's most favorite thing that life so. And big, big peppers everywhere I go. I'm Pepper, you're Pepper. Would you like to be a pepper too? Be a pepper, drink Dr. Pepper. Be a pepper, drink Dr. Pepper.
Chants frequently embed modern elements such as commercials, as we see here, and media into older forms. And games may confront social norms by playing with taboos and stereotypes, as talked about by many thinkers, one of them prominently Sutton Smith in 1997. Let's take a look at how this looks in one naughty version from the UK of My Boyfriend Bought Me an Apple. But notice these two little girls here have their own channels, and they want you to like their contribution, and they want you to subscribe. And if you subscribed, and this is the cool part, if you subscribed, as you know, they get all of these likes and all of these views, but they would be getting lots and lots of comments from peers from around the world. And these are kids giving comments, so they're not pulling punches. They love it, love it, love it, or they hate it, and they say all kinds of stuff. It's a total social experience. No, sorry.
Hi, I'm Alice. And I'm Ellie. And now we will be doing My Boyfriend Gave Me an Apple. And on Ellie's channel, called Ellie Kitchener, I done with Alice. My name is Highlighter. Oh, my boyfriend gave me an apple. My boyfriend gave me a pear. My boyfriend gave me a kiss on the lips and threw me down the stairs. I gave him back his apple. I gave him back his pear. I gave him back his kiss on the lips and threw him down the stairs. I threw him over London. I threw him over France. I threw him over the pants. His underpants were yellow. His underpants were green. His underpants were in the middle of that which made me scream. Ah! Please like and subscribe and comment. Bye!
So sweet, so goofy. The process of learning clapping games offline on the playground has been described as picking up, or as Marsh, 2008 again, observed, catching the game. Marsh emphasized the metaphor of catching games is marked by close observation, physical contact, and modeling of new game behavior. Countryman.
Hi, I'm Alice.
Countryman 2014 confirmed these perceptions through her field work in Canadian playgrounds. I really like this quote, so with your indulgence, I'm going to read it. I have watched children shadowing the moves of game-savvy peers, sometimes lip-syncing, other times softly intoning the beginnings of lines, a nanosecond behind the expert players, while miming the general outline of the moves. If you've taught kids, seen them on the playground, this is what they do. And they play the game in its entirety over and over again. Countrymen similarly highlighted the importance of having proficient players in the games. Experienced players serve as a medium through which text, movement, and music are reinforced among players who have varying skill levels. And here are two videos illustrating novice and then more expert players.
Hello, my name's Olivia and he's Logan. We're gonna do 5 play games. Okay. If you mess up in this game, I will
hard as she can. They can't quite get it. It's not quite on the beat, and they don't quite remember it, but by God, it's the game, and they're going to play it, and you're going to see it. So here's some more experienced players. And I don't know what this game is. Something like, Hey Sister Patty Cake or something.
Can't start yet, because she did 5, 6, 7, 8.
Harwood and Marsh argue that learning on playgrounds differs from formal models of instruction. They say that, from what they see, children choose to repeat whole songs and games. This is what I've seen also. But that in contrast, teachers will isolate different parts, break down things, repeat things, do sequencing, all of these things that teachers do. Even with teaching a game like Miss Mary Mac, which I have taught to my elementary methods class, and they're like confused and bothered and frightened, and you know, it's pretty fun. This is why I do it anyway. But furthermore, Harwood 1998, Desani 2004, and Lil 2014 documented children's shifts from observers to peripheral participants, that's partial, peripheral partial, to full participants in what they see as communities of practice. But now let's look at some music learning on YouTube. And it's hard to believe that YouTube has only been around since 2005. It's kind of had a huge impact on lots and lots of aspects of teaching and learning. While the processes of learning clapping games face-to-face has been documented extensively, corresponding online practices have drawn attention only recently. Recent research indicates that children increasingly adopt online spaces as part of their social and their musical networks. We're going to take a look at 2 current studies, and this is the book cover representing one of the studies, a 2-year project called Children's Playground Games and Songs in the New Media Age. And that examined the relationship between traditional and media-based learning in the UK. Byrne, who co-wrote this book in 2014, led his team in this project from 2009 to 2011. Drawing upon the work of folklorist Iona and Peter Opie. The project generated a website through the British Library, a documented film, a book, and an interactive computer game adaptation to capture children's physical play. I have not been able to find the online game adaptation to show you, but they say it's there and I believe them. This team continues to be active. They are continuing their next phase also with the museum, and it's called Playing the Archive. It's destined to go from 2017 to 2019, so we've not seen their findings yet. As part of the team, Bishop, 2014, studied one clapping game taught both on playground and online. And she found that the playground teaching followed the usual patterns. However, when 2 girls learned a version of Eeny, Meeny, Decimini from the YouTube, they watched it several times, they attempted it, they got it wrong, and then they watched it again and corrected their mistakes. They then combined the YouTube tune with already familiar clapping games and with a text that they knew already, heard on the playground. And then they took this hybrid version and they taught it to others. This happened quickly, easily, freely. Fascinating. Bishop wrote that because the YouTube videos feature games that are currently played, they reference a vernacular practice already in offline spaces, and that the videos showcased and helped to promote, to transmit this practice. Bishop analyzed the ways the children selected from a number of videos to create their composition, their composite game. Novel pedagogical features she isolated included occasional subtitles, dividing the teaching into steps, and slowing down the tempo for teaching. What was striking about these findings is the fluid way in which these children adapt what they find from both online and offline contexts. Byrne then reflected on the implications of Bishop's work. Because different game versions may coexist in an archive of older and newer materials, the multiplicity of versions expands the breadth and life of games. There was emergent interplay between local to global transmission practices. A final aspect was social dynamic change in online representations compared to socially engaged games in offline contexts. And he offers that the idea of cultural rehearsal allows for continuity between the folkloric process of oral transmission, sedimentation, and innovation, and those enabled by digital media and participatory online practices. We have presumed that we cannot see the sedimentary process, the amalgamation, the things that go on in folkloric traditions, in traditional transmission. It's easier this way to see what's going on. In the second study, Bevelin, Cruzy, Messenger, and Latane, 2018, investigated children's informal music making online through analyzing clapping games on YouTube, and you've just seen some of those that were called. 184 games were curated from different parts of the globe over 16 months from 2014 to 2016. I have no life. Video selection was based on accessibility in the moment, which was an important feature because the episodes were uploaded constantly and some disappeared. As well, there was a richness of context and self-production that we looked for. Then we analyzed the videos according to participant attributes, purpose, and learning teaching aspects. And here are the things that we found. I'm going to start from the bottom, actually. As you saw from the things that I presented, many of the participants are female. Well, the ones in the particular collection that we found, 69% of them were girls aged 3 through 12. We estimated their ages. And we noted that they played intergenerationally. The posters frequently engaged them playing among their family or with close friends in private spaces. And then the smallest category was connoisseurship, in which a player's purpose was in collecting and determining, collecting games and determining the origins of their versions. Moving up, a third of the videos displayed the player's expertise and competence. And then, at the top, nearly half of the games seemed to serve pedagogical purposes. It's hard to guess when you don't know, when you can't ask them directly, and this was an ethnographic lurking, so we were not reaching out to these children. But we would watch these again and again, and they seemed to be for a pedagogical purpose. Overall, the games were taught and learned in their entirety from whole to part, which is a process we've seen before. But on the YouTube, usually the lead performer would announce what was going to happen, and then they would play the game at full speed, then perhaps, not always, but sometimes, break down the parts into shorter fragments, sometimes at slower tempos, as was found in the UK study. Here's a version from the Dominican Republic, a clapping counting game, naturally sequenced. There are implications to be drawn here. I don't have time to draw all of them out, and I haven't thought of all of them either. But this is the beginning of an inquiry in this area. Not that I plan to do everything having to do in this area, but I'm sure many people will be looking at it. These games have acquired an online-offline duality through social media that accelerates dissemination, accessibility, and creativity. Because of their availability and the profusion of variants, online games can accommodate diverse learners and learning styles. Both studies examined here show small yet substantial adaptations in the ways that players presented and imparted games. Will these patterns persist? And what of the digital Creative Commons, which I cannot go into in great length, but it's an important thing to think about. Children who post their online play are unlikely to be aware of the darker aspects of shared space. And even as commercial messages are amalgamated, magpie-like, consumerism is not the point of their play. So it's thought-provoking to consider how convergent music learning will look over time, and how these examples will spill over into the work that we're going to be doing. And it's a pleasure to be dialoguing with you, engaging with you, using games to teach and learn music. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe one or two questions because we are already a bit behind the schedule. So, yes? Okay. Did you see if you look with younger children on YouTube about talking activities? Yeah.
Some. Many times with the younger children, you could see them playing with a grandparent, or you could see the mom holding the camera, or it was tended to be a little more intergenerational, although there were some examples from Australia, and it was very chaotic. You know, but quite fun. I mean, they were 4 years old. But it was also younger with older.
Une autre question? Another question?
Over lunch?
Over lunch. Okay, so the lunch is at the first floor, Café Labyrinthe, and you have that, so we can